in the expansive world of anti-gravity racing, there's one term that many of us are familiar with. F-Zero knockoff. It's a very interesting term to use when you look at games that bear a similar aesthetic to F-Zero, but function completely differently. In this case, Tube Slider is a perfect example of that. Now, it may not be as fast as F-Zero, but it's not that slow either. And, for the most part, you won't be racing on simple roads most of the time. The entire racing takes place in tubes. Think of F-Zero's tube courses like Sand Ocean Pipe or Port Town Long Pipe, and you'll only get a small sampling of what awaits you in Tube Slider. One of the great things this game does is make its training mode accessible from the start. You can actually reach it very easily. And better yet, there's a tutorial baked right in there. That's something F-Zero hasn't done very well. Although it's mostly a set of videos, you'll still get a grasp of the game without so much trial and error needed. There are also 2 courses to practice on in this mode, but if you follow the blue orbs, you'll find out these courses have an intended racing line, and those are what you'll need to focus on as time goes on. Now, you'll be doing your racing with 8 vehicles initially, and they all have their strengths and weaknesses as you'd expect. But their sizes also vary too. Some are larger than others. Some are on the smaller side too. As for their names, they're all very interesting in one way or another. Though I've taken the most liking to the Octopus. Now, where the magic happens is in compete mode. There are various Grand Prix, which are actually difficulty levels. And then there are 2 classes. You'll have access to the normal class at first, but after dealing with all the Grand Prix levels, you'll be taking on the maximum class. This is the hardest challenge you could possibly face. This makes F-Zero GX's story mode look easy. You're not only dealing with the fastest racers, but you also have to pay more attention to racing lines. Even one slip up will cost you a lot of speed, and that is a ridiculously valuable resource in this game. And the other racers will know this too. If you get hit by some of them from behind, you have no way to defend yourself except for hoping to boost away or move away from them in time. You see, there are no things like spin attacks or side attacks in this game. It's mainly about technique. You need to be very familiar with your vehicle, very familiar with the courses, and very familiar with certain systems in the game, such as the lock-on system, which the tutorial explains. A neat thing that the Grand Prix mode does is it allows you to choose the order of the courses you get to participate in. There are some cases where certain courses are mandatory, but for the most part, if you're struggling in one course, for example, you can pick another one and come back to it later. Either way, you still have to handle those courses. Now, another thing is the Grand Prix uses a point system. Similar to other racing games, you do get points for finishing in certain positions, but if you fall below 4th place, you won't get any points, and it'll be considered a failure. You'll have to retry. Sounds a lot like a mix of the point system in F-Zero, but also the rank out system you would find in Mario Kart 64 and the original F-Zero. After clearing all the Grand Prix, either in normal or maximum, you get to unlock one final course, the Triad Road Grand Prix, and you'll go one-on-one with the most powerful vehicle this game has to offer. it is huge. If you want any hope of keeping up with this thing, you have to catch up to it long enough to use the lock-on ability and prevent it from boosting. Then after that, you have to race as flawlessly as you can. It shouldn't be hard because this course doesn't have as much undulation as others, but you still have to pay attention to your racing line. Tube Slider is technically a bit older than F-Zero GX, but only a couple months, but it does offer a special flavor. The racing is a lot more difficult than in F-Zero GX, and probably the entire F-Zero series in general, even on the master difficulty. But at the same time, going fast and staying fast is very satisfying in this game. You just have to know how to use the racing lines, know how to use the tubes. Though, no racing game is complete without its own brand of BS. For example, some opponents literally start in front of the starting line, like way ahead of the starting line. You may also sometimes find that some opponents become hard to reach. We're talking about 6 seconds ahead at a point. That usually only happens on the hardest races possible. And while it is part of the game, there are various hexagon-shaped pickups, blue, yellow, and red. The blue ones give you energy or turbo, and the yellow ones act more like dash plates. The red ones, though, are the most important. They're rare, they only show up in one section of a course and give you the most speed possible. The main issue is, though, races tend to hinge entirely upon hitting them. If you miss even one, in some cases, you are screwed unless you're way ahead of everyone else, which will be an astronomically rare occurrence. And remember that there are size differences with vehicles. Some vehicles can take up more than one of these at a time. And in the event that you do miss one because someone else took it, you'll have to wait before another one shows up. You probably won't, but you still will not get to use it until it respawns properly. In contrast to the race courses in Tube Slider, the pipe courses in F-Zero have been usually straightforward and don't have as much undulation. At least the official courses at that rate. And speaking of which, there are some games out there that have their own takes on tube sections. One of them in particular, though, is Gravity Chase, a more recent game that was also billed to be an F-Zero knockoff or an F-Zero clone. But it seems to follow more closely in the footsteps of Tube Slider. Of course, most of the tube courses are a lot smoother, at least smoother looking. If you liked Tube Slider, you probably might like this one. Just know that there are some courses that are more cylindrical as well, instead of just all tubes. If you weren't that fond of tube courses in F-Zero though, you might have a hard time adjusting to this game. And if you're also new to playing Tube Slider, you can't just go in and expect an easy victory. You are going to have to spend some time with it and get familiar with it. This is not some pick up and play game. It is easy to learn though, and that means you will have to put in some time to master it. And that's the only way you're going to really succeed in the highest difficulties. And it's also the best way to get the full sensation of speed that this game has to offer. Tube Slider is definitely a classic that should be talked about more, but you have to remember, you can't just go into this expecting F-Zero just because it may seem like F-Zero on the surface. It's actually more of its own thing, its own experience. It has its own style. Maybe not the characters to go along with it, but it still has its own identity. In the same way that we see games starting to resemble F-Zero more in terms of gameplay and responsiveness, we may see something like that happen for Tube Slider. Gravity Chase is a start, but will there be more like it? That's the question.